Overcrowded student housing? Are mortgage rates staying flat or going up? Yeah, this is what we talk about with a good friend and mortgage broker, Dion Begg, right after this. Yes, my friends, here we are all the way tuning in from Barbados. How are you, my man? Dion Begg,
I'm
what's going
fantastic.
on?
Fantastic, man. Fantastic. Had a wonderful summer with the kids over that summer break. Absorbed as much of that Canadian sunshine as possible. It really was a great holiday.
Excellent, excellent. And I might have thrown off some of our listeners, but you do work in Barbados, but your primary business is right here in the GTA in Ontario with writing mortgages for people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, the beauty of our job, unlike yours, Gary, is that we can be remote, but we need to be obviously on the phone, on emails, and I have a great team of people in Canada that drive that. So, yeah, it's been great, and in fact, just in the last couple of years, we funded over $300 million in volume
Wow.
in funding. And yeah, that's while everybody's working remotely, as in from home. So
Yeah.
it's a great business model. If anybody's interested in getting into real estate, the realtors get all the glory, but us mortgage brokers, we get to work from home.
That's right. That is 100% correct. Yes. Yes. All right. There has been lots going on. We took the last couple of weeks off from our weekly calls, and there, of course, when we do that, things tend to happen. So, the elephant in the room, rate hold. So that's possibly a good thing, and we can talk about that. So, what's your thoughts on that rate hold last week?
Yeah, I mean, you could almost hear the sigh of relief on Wednesday, September 6th, when the Bank of Canada announced that yes, we are holding rates. If you were to ask me 3 weeks prior, which way are we going here, my gut told me it was likely going to be that 0.25% jump. But just in the week prior to the announcement, some economic data came out, which was less strong than the Bank of Canada had predicted. Their own prediction for GDP growth in July was positive 1.5%. And as it turns out, we're looking at, sorry, we're talking Q2 here. So they expected Q2 growth of 1.5. As it turns out, it was negative 0.2.
Hmm.
So, with that weaker economic data, they were feeling more comfortable with the fact that, their intended impacts of these interest rate increases have finally trickled down to the main street, where number one, people are spending less. And also, the job data came out where there were, in fact, job losses, and unemployment grew to 5.5%, which was the highest number it's been for a very long time. So, based on those numbers, which just came in pretty much the week before the announcement, they were able to then hold rates. And yeah, a great sigh of relief for anybody who holds a variable rate, anybody who's coming up for renewal, anybody who's looking to buy. So yeah, positive news, at least on that day.
Yeah, yeah. And it does I think I heard that relief here as well. That big sigh of relief. Excuse me. It's interesting what a rate change or not a change can do to a market. And meaning the mindset of people in a sense too. And this comes at a time where I just posted a video of the Toronto data and the market report for Toronto, and August was definitely a down month, but every August is a down
Mm.
month, right? And it's just understanding that real estate cycle of understanding
Yeah,
where we are.
actually, for the viewers who don't understand that, Gary, why don't you just explain that cycle and schooling and all that, how it all links together?
Schooling. I feel like every time I read the data, I get schooled, but that's good. That's okay. And it's just your typical real estate cycle of the year. Think about what happens throughout the year. January, New Year's resolutions. Hey, we should buy a new house. So January always kind of picks up, and then it slows off typically a little bit into March, and then we have our spring market, which in recent years has been late March, but it's
Mm.
typically April. If you look at like a 50-year span of information, typically April, and then June. May, June is really busy. July tends to tail off ever so slightly. In
Mhm.
August, everyone's on vacation.
Vacation.
It's
Yep. So
it's
there's very
it's
few transactions every August, right?
yeah.
Nobody's in the buying time mind frame. They're in the holiday mindset.
And it's just simple. It's just simple reasoning around that typically outside of financial reasons. And then of course September, people are back and maybe kids are back to school and that buying market picks up again for September, October, tails off in November. When you know it, December, there's always a little bump. And then there's that cycle again. So
Mhm.
that's outside of major financial decisions and changes in our market. That's your typical buying and selling um,
Seasonality, I guess you
strategy.
call it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seasonality. That's the word I'm looking
Yeah.
for. Thank you. But there's other factors, and of course, you have years like COVID, and I think we should throw out all the data from those years, right?
I don't think we've had a regular year since 2019.
No, no.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a second. So 2016, big ramp up, just like the last couple of years into 2017, June of, or yeah, late May, early June of 2017, everything kind of came to an end where it's
This was the
not nice
foreign
saying
buyer
end.
tax, was it?
Yeah. All that kind of crazy stuff. And we were,
Mhm.
selling over ask and everything like that. And then 2018 was a rebuild year, which is where I think we're headed right now into a
Yep.
rebuild year, right? And having everything somewhat stabilize, I think, and getting used to where our new rates are. What do you think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so I mean, I hate to be the guy who keeps parroting what we're hearing in the media, but higher for longer is ultimately what all of us really need to get used to. And you know what? Let me just talk about that and put it in a bit of perspective. So, global financial crisis, 2008, we had major issues internationally. Most major banks in Western countries, such as Canada, Australia, US, decided to hold rates very low for very long, and we rode that for about 15 years. And so we were in an interest rate environment where we were getting used to 2 and 3% interest rates. But if you look back to the previous 50 years, that average rate was somewhere in that 5% range. When I left Australia and came to Canada in 2008, I remember rates in Australia were at about 6%, and rates in Canada come the next year were at 3.5, 3.25%. And I couldn't believe it because I was working in the world of finance, financial planning, and making those financial plans in Australia based on interest rates of 6%, cost of funds at 6%. And when I came to Canada, I'm like, wow, this is crazy. But it wasn't just Canada. It was the timing. It was 2009, start of 2009, when we had to make those drastic drops in rates. But the fact that we held them as low as we did for as long as we did, many people benefited from. Many of the listeners here who bought their house for 300 grand are now sitting on houses worth $1 million plus, right? So right now, we've got a lot of people who've benefited from that, but we may be going back to normal, and normal may well be 5%. And so, for any of you listening who are waiting for Gary or I to say, yeah, we're going to get back to 2% sometime soon, you'll be waiting for a very long time, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that's the soundbite right there. We're heading back to normal, right? Of
Yeah.
that 5-ish%. Yeah, yeah. I think you nailed it. I have a question for you. You know, over Twitter can be a wonderful place to get very negative or positive. And if you look right now, depending on how your feed's set up, it could be, foreclosure, power sale, this, or, financial ruin because of this and everything else. And investors are, are losing properties left, right, and center. Well, that's not really the case. But if you did buy in the last couple of years and you are on variable rate, I feel for you. But for those that get lumped into that all investors are bad, and you and I have owned properties for 10 plus years, and in a handful of my properties I've not refinanced, which means my mortgage balances and I
Very
had
low.
a call are very low. And I had a conversation with Bida Delicia, our paralegal. I said they're manageable
Mm.
even when that variable rate pops up.
Yep.
There's still a lot of investors like you and I that have lower mortgage balances where when the variable rate does come up, we'll call it a manageable payment. Yeah. Do you agree with that statement or?
I do. So, and I can see this in my own business, Gary, where, if you look at the last 15 years of my business, which is in line with those 15 years of low interest rates, we helped a lot of people uh, on what we call a personalized real estate plan, where we basically prepared them to go out and buy multiple properties over those last 15 years. Some of them bought 3 properties in a year. Most of them bought 3 properties over the course of 2 or 3 years. And when you look at that, we're talking about the fact that most of my clients are in debt to the tune of well over $1 million, which is generally a lot more than the average Canadian. So then you would automatically think that, okay, these are the people who are the most impacted by these interest rates. It's logic. The reality is that's not the case. That most of these guys bought the right types of properties. We've spoken earlier about the difference between speculating and investing. They bought the right type of property that day one cash flowed. They built equity, they had a buffer. And not only do they have now a lower loan to value, but they also have these great facilities called home equity lines of credit. And a home equity line of credit is what I call your first insurance policy. And what I mean by that is, if things go sideways, if rates jump, if next month's mortgage payment looks a little bit tight, then many of our clients have lines of credit to the tune of $50,000 to $500,000, which they can lean on in skinny times. Now, most of them haven't had to go there yet, but they know that it's there, it's their backup, and it will get them through this storm. It's the image I always have of the times we're going through now is that we're all in this boat in the middle of the ocean, and the ocean has decided to rough us up a little bit right now. So we're in the middle of these waves, and we're heading somewhere. We're heading to a destination where we know there's some sunshine. Problem is, we don't know how long it'll take to get there. And if you have those HELOCs, if you have liquidity in the real estate market, then you actually have the ability to hold on to get to the sunshine. The calls I'm getting, the distress calls, the emergency calls I'm getting, Gary, they're actually, most of them are not from my previous clients. They're from new clients, people I've never spoken to before, who unfortunately got tied up in that FOMO of 2020, 2021, over leveraged, were given really bad advice by whomever worked with them on the real estate front or the financing front, and they're basically underwater. They're underwater. They can't afford the payment. They have to sell their property, and they very well may sell their property where they don't get back their initial down payment. Right? They might actually sell and end up with less money in their hands than they had when they walked in to buy that property. And so all the more reason that when you're buying, to get the right type of financial advice, never ever use your last dollar to buy your property, and always have contingencies, facilities, credit facilities, the bank of mom and dad. It's never a bad thing. It's always nice to be there or know that that's there. But whenever we go and buy property, we always want to know that if you run into some rough times, that you're going to be able to manage that. So unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who ran into that sort of bad advice and bad timing.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's well said. And just so we're clear, Dion's not talking about, and he mentioned this being over leveraged. He's not talking about using those HELOCs up to capacity, right? It's just knowing that, hey, if I'm a little bit short this month or what have you, I can go get that based on whether I have savings or access to it. We've always talked about, and this will be, a touchy subject, and I learned a long time ago that it's not the cost of money, it's access to money, right?
Yep.
However, we are getting to that stage where that cost of money is making different decisions for us. So we all have to have these conversations well in advance about what those contingencies look like, because you might think to yourself, hey, well, I've got 100K here available. I can just go pay with that 100. Well, that cost of that money, you can't do that forever, right? So having your exit plans is a big one. Okay. Let's change the subject a little bit, because you were just at the airport and you saw something kind of intriguing, and it's certainly at the top of mind right now for a lot of people around here. So share with us your airport experience.
Yeah, so we're shooting this in the month of September, but just a couple of weeks ago, I was at Pearson Airport. I went down to arrivals just to take a look around, And what I saw down there were these welcome desks for international students who were coming into Canada. And, it obviously made me think of our conversations, Gary, about immigration, housing, and student housing, and the challenges that people are having around student housing. And really, what I was asking myself, and I shot a video on this, which I'll have to repost because I think it disappeared. But the question I asked when I was standing in front of these desks was, when these people get welcomed and they're given their admission into that particular institution, is that institution also simultaneously helping them place them into reasonable housing? And I think we all know that the answer to that is unfortunately no, right? It's left up to that international student in many instances to deal with the private sector to find their own housing. And this has been the talk of the town. Every time I turn on the radio, people are saying, we need to start tying these visas not just to admissions into universities or higher learning, but tying the visa into, do you have accommodation established? I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that also might present opportunities for investors and some interesting policies that governments can discuss. I don't think we should shut the doors to international students, international immigration. I think we just need to manage how we deal with people when they're on the ground in Canada, and how we can manage that better, right?
I love it. And I think we all can agree that, and we've seen some news articles or the radio, and even last night, I haven't dove deep into it, but there was a landlord in Brampton that was trying to evict, I think, 15 to 20 people out of his house, students, right?
That sounds
And
like a horror story.
and it was a horror story. Of course, everyone's posting about it, and people that were there have video of it and everything like that. And I always say, if that's just one landlord that might have 15 students living in a house, you can count that there's probably 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000 more like that. I don't know about 1,000, but you get where I'm saying. He's not the only one.
Well, look, on the data around this is very varied depending on the sources that you go to. But I feel like the number, something like 800 to 900,000 international students come into the country every year, of which about half or more end up in Ontario. So if we're talking about 450,000 students in Ontario, you bet that, if these institutions aren't building student accommodation with a bunch of their profit that they're obviously making, and you probably know the numbers here, that an international student pays 3 to 4 times that of a Canadian student at the same institution. So these institutions are profiting to the tune of 4x. Maybe they should be taking some of that money and building some accommodation.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm going to link to it. We'll figure out the internet ways to do it. I did a video maybe a week or so ago, and I know that you had mentioned offline about Benjamin Tall saying that, hey, we might be under guessing, if it will, our population by about 1 million people, which is
Just 1 million people. Yeah.
just a huge number. And then in the same article, in fact, they were talking about, or not article, it was a report talking about the number of, or that financial number that international students bring to Canadian schools, post-secondary schools. And I actually did the math online, which I should never do. You should never do math live, but I did it. And it was way off, meaning the schools are making millions and millions of millions of revenue, whether they're making that money, but at least that's revenue coming in. And that was just tuition. That wasn't everything. That wasn't all the ancillary pieces that go with it. It was just tuition. And I'll link to that video and into that article or that report so people can see it. Does that mean that the post-secondary schools have the funding or have the means to go and build? They're probably in a better position than most. Well, how about that? That's probably a fair way to say it.
Gary, and this just comes to mind now. When a developer goes and builds a condo building, they must allow, for development costs, which allow for the creation of parks, roads, etc., that service that area. I feel almost the same around, if these institutions are making these types of profits, and there's nothing wrong with that. We live in a capitalist society, and that's got us to where we are. But at the same time, they should potentially be taking some of those profits, and the government should be imposing that they are responsible for some level of housing, right? I think it just makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. In a video I just posted on Friday, I talked about you know, our current policies, rules and regulations, if you will, the current way we're doing things to build more housing, for affordable housing, to get that affordability aspect to it, it's not working. So I don't have the solution, but what that tells me is we need to change what we're doing, or we need to add a couple of things or do some tweaks, because the affordability piece is not working. So maybe you and I can banter on that over the next, several months and come up with different ideas and things like that,
Well, look, I mean, if ever there was a need for some outside the box government policy, now is the time, right?
Yeah.
We can't continue to allow people to go without housing. I mean, I drove past St. Mike's Hospital a couple of weeks ago, and there's a park nearby there, and we actually have a tent city, which is similar to what I saw at Venice Beach in California when I was there. And I was astounded when I was in California, thinking to myself, how could a government allow this to happen? And yet it's happening here in our downtown core, right? And God knows that, at least in California, in wintertime, people can still live outside. What happens to these people in wintertime in Canada? I don't want to think about it. It's a sad thing to think about.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Okay. Dion and I are always the glasses half full kind of people. So let's fill that glass. Yeah. Let's fill that glass. To say that there's always opportunity in chaos. Well, there is opportunity. But I think during this time, Dion, would you agree that education might be one of your biggest allies?
Yeah. And it may not just be the textbook education. It's the ear to the ground on the street, on the main street, as to what is happening in Canadian society, Canadian economics, on in your neighborhood. Like what is going on? I will tell you that there's a lot of people out there right now who if they're not already struggling, in these next 6 months, it's going to tick up. I think we might have talked about this before, that there's actually more mortgage renewals in the second half of this year than in the first. And so there's going to be more and more people in this next 6 months who are going to be facing those increase in payments. I would hope that most of them have enough equity and are able to restructure their financing. So what I'm seeing is, for the majority of people who call us in those emergency situations, the good news is that the equity increase that they experienced over these last 5, 10, 15 years is in fact what's going to save them and get them through these troubled waters to that sunshine that we spoke about earlier. So I would say to those of you who are feeling the pinch, that if you have equity, then you likely have the solution to get yourself through, this choppy water.
Excellent. And while you're talking about that, the thought came to mind, and maybe we do this in the next video or two, is a good strategy and what people can do when they receive their mortgage renewals. There's and just to kind of lay out the different options that people have. So maybe we talk about that on our next call, because a lot of people will just sign that dotted line and send their mortgage renewal back, and cross their fingers, hope for the best type thing in times like this. But there's other strategies out there that Dion can certainly educate us on. My friend, remind us how to get a hold of you. I know it's all over your shirt and everything. I like it. You got it.
Kangamortgage.ca. Look us up there, guys, and we'd be happy to help you. And in fact, just on that renewal note, Gary, just last week I helped a personal friend of mine who is coming up for renewal. Called me. He said, Dion, this is what my bank is offering. I went back to him and I said, look, I can help you, but just go back to your bank and say these secret things. And he did, and suddenly his rate dropped significantly. So we can talk about that in the next episode.
If that's not a cliffhanger, I don't know what is. Okay. From the mortgage world, that is. My friends, thanks for tuning in. Of course, that's Dion Begg. I'm Gary McGowan. We'll see everybody in the next video. Goodbye for now.